Okay, so to start off, hi everyone. My name is Million Kim, and I'm a postdoc researcher at UC San Diego. And I'd like to present the recent paper which I worked on titled the Digital Therapeutics Real-World Evidence Framework, which is an approach for guiding evidence-based DTX design, development, testing, and monitoring. I'll be presenting, and Eric will be here, and he will join together for the discussion. Um, Great. So before I begin, I know already Vivek introduced me a little bit, but let me briefly explain myself. So my background is in clinical psychology and biomedical science, and I'm a clinician as a board certified behavior analyst with a behavioral science background. And in the past, I worked as a health coach and supervisor and manager at Noom, which is how I became involved in digital health research, and as well as an advisory board member at several digital healthcare companies in South Korea. And I'd like to acknowledge my mentor, my current mentor, Eric, and co-authors of this paper. And here's the disclosures. And the agenda for today is like this. So first, we will talk about what is DTX and what is real-world evidence within the premises of the real-world evidence. And I'm going to talk about the major issue that this paper is trying to focus on. And then I will introduce this framework and then jump into the discussion. And to set up some boundary conditions for today's talk, this framework is to guide appropriate evidence production in the real world that matches the inherent dynamic and context-dependent nature of DTX. So for today, my hope is to offer some big pictures in developing and deploying digital therapeutics in the real-world context. To start, I first want to highlight the take-home message from this paper, which is real-world evidence can be supported with real-world partners. And here I'm emphasizing the importance of real-world partners. And I will unpack this more in the later slides. And to do this, we need to first set up a series of logical iterative steps regarding why, when, and how DTX developers should combine rigorous study designs with real-world evidence in initial and ongoing evaluation. And second, to recommend practices and principles that support ethical and equitable health outcomes as the expectations of what DTX developers should do to satisfy their requirements for approval. So first, what is DTX and real-world evidence? I'm sure most of you have heard of these or will know pretty much about these terms. But so I'm not going to explain this in depth, but to make sure that we are aligned, digital therapeutics are health software tools designed to prevent, treat, or alleviate a disease, disorder, condition, or injury by delivering interventions that have demonstrable positive therapeutic effects on individual health and produce real-world outcomes. And here is the visualization of where the digital therapeutics is placed at among the broad spectrum of digital health. And here is the definition of real-world evidence. So basically, real-world evidence is generated from the real-world data from real-world context by using different study designs or analysis. And the promise of the real-world evidence is threefold. So first is make predictions and claims relevant to an individual's environment and context. And second is to improve decision-making about whether a DTX improves upon a currently used standard of care intervention or other real-world options. And third is offers efficient ongoing monitoring that support continued evaluation of the DTX sustained effectiveness. And what is the major issue relevant to this? So the core issue, which we'd like to focus on this paper, is that although the broad principles on study design and methods are included in the existing real-world evidence frameworks, the current guidance dedicated specifically to the real-world study method is currently lacking. And this issue has been also clearly stated in this review paper titled Real-World Evidence for Regulatory Decision-Making, Guidance from Around the World. And this paper basically reviews all the regulatory pathways about the real world evidence around the world. And it identifies three key regulatory real world elements, which are regulatory real world evidence frameworks, real world data quality and standard policies, and guidance on real world study methods. And as you can check in this paper, the US FDA and EMA from Europe and PMDA from Japan and others like UK, Taiwan, and China had issued guidance documents for best practices for traditional post-marketing safety profile and surveillance studies, as well as patient registries. But they all are acknowledging that more work needs to be done to guide on real-world study methods. And this lacking of the guidance on the real world study method has created a gap on building justification for DTX reimbursement system within healthcare settings, which is a huge challenge right now in the DTX industry. So the main gap that this DTX real world evidence framework aims to fill is not only creating that DTX could be useful for customers, but also DTX getting a billable code within a healthcare system that allows them to do their work. And how? As seen here, the DTX real evidence is co-led by DTX company and a real world partner. And its main focus is not only on the effectiveness and safety, but also on the other usable evidence to guide real world use and deployments of DTX, such as sustainability, equity, scalability, and accessibility in the real world setting. And with that said, the trial setting pursued the pragmatic conditions biasing towards ecological validity, accounting for internal validity. And so here is the overview of the DTX real world evidence framework. And before I jump in, I really want to again highlight the key foundation here again, which I've been repeatedly mentioned earlier, the importance of partnership among the key stakeholders. And these stakeholders can play three critical roles. So first role is DTX implementer, second is community serving organizations, and third is DTX evaluator. So DTX implementer refers to people with the capability to provide ongoing sustained deployments of the DTX. So for example, like industry, medical centers, or public health departments with proven software development and management capabilities can be included. And for the community serving organization refers to people that is working with and serving a target population that can provide real world data. And these could be included such as like hospitals and clinics, federally qualified health centers, or community clinics or public health departments. And lastly, this DTX evaluator refers to people with expertise in the relevant methods and approaches recommended throughout the framework, both in terms of flowchart of research activities that are depicted here and the use of real world data. So please remember that all of the phases that are depicted here that are included in this framework is based on the real world partnership. And the reason for prioritizing real world partnership, especially highlighting the engagement of clinical and community partners, provide DTX implementers with first, true north definition and understanding of what a successful DTX would be for them. And second, real world knowledge and insights around context, assets, and areas of need, and insights about where, for whom, and when different DTX design options may be appropriate or not. And lastly, a venue for real world evidence production, and thus allow for them to test rigorous DTX development and evaluation. Before I start to introduce the each phases, and I'll give you this tangible scenario to help you understand how people might proceed through each phase of this framework. And this scenario is based on the Spire Health, which is actual digital therapeutic company for chronic pain, and which can play a role as a DTX implementer, and Family Health Centers of San Diego, which is FHCSD, one of the nation's 10 largest federally qualified health centers operating in San Diego County. And this organization can play a role as some community serving organization. And as it is stated at the very bottom part of this table here, the DTX evaluator can be internal staff at FHCSD or Spire Health, or could be drawn from external partners such as academic partners or consultancy firms who can act as an objective honest broker. So building a robust partnership requires first identify the success criteria of each stakeholder. And I won't go in too much detail here, but you can find more information in our paper in our supplementary file. And then the second, the stakeholders may understand and agree on a set of boundary conditions for targeted population in order to distribute the DTX within a robust partnership. And lastly, defining each responsibility of stakeholders and setting up the leadership structure is an important step in building a robust partnership. And so overall, Spire Health may lead decision-making on DTX development, and FHCSD may lead decision-making on defining real-world success criteria, constraints, and assets. And in addition, the DTX evaluator may provide expertise and guidance on the appropriate and ethical use of methods relevant to each phase in the framework. So based on this scenario, now here is the full phase of DTX real-world evidence framework, which I like to now go through for each steps. So this framework is comprised of 4 phases similar to traditional trial phases, but adapted for real-world evidence. And so which is phase 1, design, phase 2, develop, and phase 3, test, and phase 4, monitor. And each phase includes a subordinate activities that work synergistically to guide decisions as DTX developing team, which refers to partnership across DTX implementers, community serving organizations, and DTX evaluators. And then the team may be comprised of experts in the field such as like behavior science, clinical trial design, medicine, engineering, statistics and data science, or UI UX design experts, and business development. And and here I want to also note that we are not trying to invent any new wheels. We are trying to get already existing approaches to be well organized for digital therapeutics to generate appropriate real-world evidence. So we are going to show you now proper methods and original approaches according to each phase. And then we are going to flag how they are framed into our real-world evidence framework. So for phase 1, which is the design phase, I first want to mention that this phase originally corresponds to the double diamond approach, as you can see here. This double diamond approach is generally used in human-centered design. And I'm not going to go in depth about this approach, but you can still find a lot of information in our paper and into other different types of design processes. And if we closely look into how this original double diamond method has been framed into our phase 1, you can see that this is composed of 2 activities, which are first problem specification and solution specification. And remember that ultimate goal of this phase 1 is to design the DTX product. So the problem specification includes identifying the real-world needs, constraints, assets, and approaches to support future sustainability, both financially and ecologically. And solution specification focuses on iteratively creating the DTX through agile development and prototyping from low fidelity to high fidelity prototypes. And again, all of these activities must be processed with the real-world partners. And here are 2 decision points which are in these diamonds. And first decision point is questioning about have needs, assets, constraints, and sustainability plans in the target population of users been satisfactorily defined? And if this is no, you need to go back to the problem specification. But if it's yes, you can move on to the next decision point, with the question asking, has a minimal viable product, MVP, and corresponding SMART benchmarks been created? And here, the SMART benchmarks, it stands for specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and timely. So for example, SMART benchmarks may include like a decrease of 3% in HbA1c among 60% of our DTX users after 6 months of intervention for effectiveness benchmark, or less than 10% of our DTX users experience non-serious adverse events associated with distal treatment after a month of an intervention for safety benchmark. And when setting these benchmarks, the team should balance what is meaningful related to current best practices with what is plausible to achieve for the target population and setting. And this SMART benchmark needs to be set and produced for the future studies at this point, which you don't have to achieve it at this time. So the transition from phase 1 to phase 2 is justifiable when the SMART benchmarks are clearly defined, relevant to this MVP. The key approaches here includes agile or lean development of practices, or prototype testing and development, or rapid prototype testing and qualitative methods. So based on the given scenario, which I mentioned before, in phase 1, design may seem like this. And I'd like to highlight that here, the key driver of phase 1 is HCSD, supporting organizing of patient providers, and defining success constraints and exits. And as you can see, based on the framework, we present a plausible example on how we specified the problem along with the needs, assets, constraints. I won't go into detail here, but if you're interested, you can find this in our paper as well. And this is how we specify the solution. And as you can see, in order to answer the question in each decision point, we clearly stated every single element that are required during the design process of DTX, such as sustainability plan and the intervention elements of MVP, and implementation elements, and the SMART benchmarks. And it takes a long time to identify both problems and solutions before even developing DTX, because it requires a consensus among relevant stakeholders. And this is why, once again, building a robust partnership before starting this first phase of this framework is critical. And next is the phase 2, which is develop. And again, the phase 2 activities are originally drawn from 2 NIH recognized approaches for behavioral intervention development, namely the obesity orbit model and its extensions, and the multi-phase optimization strategy. And I'm not going to explain in detail about these original approaches here again, but you can find in this paper, in our paper, for the summary of this. And so the goal of phase 2 is to guide DTX development and optimization via real-world evidence. And there are 2 types of activities. One is proof of concept, and the second is optimization. The proof of concept focuses primarily on the plausibility testing about if the overall packages is producing meaningful results as defined via the SMART benchmarks. And the optimization trial produces evidence to improve elements of the DTX. So with the first decision point asking, do any elements of DTX needs to be improved or tested? If it's no, you go for proof of concept trials. And if it's yes, you can go for optimization trials. And since the proof of concept uses SMART benchmarks, it enables resource-efficient studies with clear go, no-go decision-making from descriptive statistics. So after this activity, the next decision point is asking, has a meaningful SMART benchmarks been obtained in the intended population and setting? And here again, it is emphasizing if it has been done towards the intended population and setting. And this highlights the importance of building a real-world partnership. And for the optimization, it is a concept drawn from engineering, which supports any problems such as the DTX costing too much or not being sufficiently adhered to, and is difficult to implement in real-world context, or is inaccessible to the target population. And like the SMART benchmark, the key logic here is to specify clear optimization criteria, meaning definition of success that can be tested using an appropriately selected optimization trial. And so the key approaches for proof of concept and optimization are like this. So overall, the movement from phase 2 to phase 3 requires real-world evidence that demonstrates that DTX can produce clinically meaningful effects. In other words, achieve smart benchmarks in the targeted population and setting. And again, based on our given scenario, phase 2, development may seem like this. And I like to highlight that here, again, the key driver of this phase 2 is viral health in both developing and optimizing DTX to meet smart benchmarks. And we also provided different cases for first decision point, asking do any elements of DTX need to be improved or tested. And I won't go in depth in here again, but you can find this in our supplementary file in our paper if you're interested in. And the next is phase 3 test. And the activities here are based on the insights from pragmatic clinical trial best practices, including REAIM, reach effectiveness, adoption, implementation, and maintenance, and pre-phase 2, and recommendations from NIH recognized expert panel on competitor selection for behavior intervention. Here again, we are not inventing anything, but we are trying to organize these ideas into the frame of producing rigorous real-world evidence for DTX. So this may seem pretty much similar to phase 3 clinical trials for pharmaceuticals, but the main difference for this framework is that it is biased towards pragmatism to produce real-world evidence. So it is not about efficacy, but the effectiveness. And so it uses the smart benchmarks added in the modified concert diagram to justify generalization claims and decision-oriented comparator selection. I won't have much time to explain these in depth here, but you can read our paper for the summaries of these as well. And the goal of this phase 3 is to test if the DTX is feasible and produces meaningful improvements or benchmarks related to a competitor. And there may be two types of activities, which is first feasibility or pilot and effectiveness. So the basic logic here is that if you don't have enough evidence to run on effectiveness trial, you run for feasibility or pilot study. And if you don't get any clear sense on what this means, I suggest you read our paper for more in detail. But for DTX testing, the key approaches includes between person randomized control trials, such as remote RCTs or cluster ICTs, or even step wedge trial can be included here. So if the smart benchmarks are not met, or there was not a clinically a significant difference observed between the DTX and the competitor, then we suggest that you return back to the phase 1 and phase 2 activities to build up more evidence for this. And if smart benchmarks and clinically meaningful differences are achieved, then the results can be submitted to the regulator for official review. And so based on our given scenario in phase 3 test may seem like this. And I'd also like to highlight here again that the key driver of this phase 3 is DTX evaluators in both designing and conducting feasibility or pilot trials or this effectiveness trial. And we also provided different cases for first decision point, asking is evidence available to show an effectiveness trial can be conducted. So again, you can find this more in detail in our supplementary file. And for the effectiveness trial here, it is really important how you set up the competitor. So though the standard of care exists in the scenario, if there is no clear standard of care that exists in the setting where it needs to be implemented and replaced, we recommend to use the step wedge trial instead of traditional RCTs. And I only mentioned this to give you a sense that traditional RCT may not be the only way to test the effectiveness of the intervention. And the last phase of phase 4 is monitor. And activities for this phase are originally drawn from implementation science and agile science methods. And for more information on this, you can find it again in our paper. So the goal of phase 4 is to monitor the use of the DTX within the real world, to enable DTX developers to improve the DTX with additional real world evidence collected from their clinical or community partners, and to support expansion of the target market for the DTX via stepwise additional assessments. So there are three key questions which we think that people should be monitoring the data for. So first is, are there diminishing positive effects over time in the real world use or for somebody? Or second, are there any possibilities to improve the DTX elements in some way? And the last is there a broader target market to expand its use? And you can use real-world evidence monitoring to get any signals to identify if there is a case for any of these paths. And if there is, you may return back to the first phase. And if there isn't, it means you're doing good. And again, this monitoring may also require smart benchmarks to be set for all key targets of evidence production as one pathway for cultivating more rigor in monitoring efforts. It can also establish incentive for DTX company to engage in continuous improvement and to maintain mutually beneficial partnerships. So based on our given scenario, phase 4 monitor may seem like this. So here, the key driver is again Spire Health, who leads the deployment and scaling this to population aligned with the evidence produced from phase 3. And here we provided some examples for each case, like diminishing positive effects and the improvements in DTX elements and a broader target market. And so what do we need to consider next? We know that there are many issues involved in developing DTX and in working with clinical or community partners to incorporate real-world evidence in DTX. And we acknowledge that this framework has not been rigorously examined, and that additional work is needed to establish its value. So for this, we expand on the need for 3 areas for our future work related to the framework. So first is how using real-world data advances health equity. Second is cultivating trustworthy partnership that foster the use of this framework. And as a secondary pathway to advance health equity. And then third is suggested next step with regards to the regulation and funding. So firstly, let's talk about the real-world data and health equity. We believe that increasing the sophistication in the effective use of real-world data can be a crucial tool in tackling some of the major challenges in healthcare today, such as like identifying and addressing health disparities to promote health equity for everyone. So real-world data offers the information needed to pinpoint unmet needs, both generally and for specific individuals, communities, and populations where current practices fall short. So with this in mind, future work could leverage this real-world data to develop evidence-based solutions that target the communities most in need. So therefore, this real-world data can be integrated throughout the life cycle of DTX, aligning with the DTX framework as shown here. And additionally, this real-world data can be utilized to establish benchmarks across key evidence production targets like what I mentioned before, effectiveness, safety, and equity, providing the essential data needed to measure, monitor, and drive equitable progress in both individual and population health. And next is let's talk about the cultivating trustworthy partnership. And showing in the hypothetical scenario that I given here in this talk, we see that opportunities to implement the framework through partnership among groups that may not have traditionally collaborated, such as industry partners working with FQHCs, supporting by academic partners. And the trustworthiness of all stakeholders involved is the fundamental to any evidence production approach and must be acknowledged as a starting point. And trust isn't just about effective communication, and but it's about embedding ethics, inclusion, and equity as a core guiding principle in our work. And to foster this trust, we suggest that utilizing best practice from fields like team science approach, community-based participatory research, or patient-led innovation, and so on. And I also want to emphasize that creating partnership that includes not only those with trained expertise, but also with lived expertise can pave the way for equitable spaces where robust DTX co-design and development can take place. So as you can see in this figure, there's two different levels of this expertise, lived expertise and trained expertise. And as team engages, and each of these dotted points is representing the person, the member of the team. And as the team engages in the activities outlined in the framework, it's crucial to identify who will lead and who will respond in each activity. And this ensures that all relevant knowledge, skills, and wisdom are brought to the table, enabling the creation of solutions that are effective in the real world settings. So as you can see here, this is trying to explain how the team dynamics can be diversified within the different levels of expertise throughout the activities in the framework. And without this approach, there is a significant risk that decisions will be based on incomplete knowledge or assumptions or even unjustified biases, ultimating widening the gap in health disparities in the digital health. Actually, my colleague and I are currently working, exploring this idea further as a follow-up paper, focusing on how to recognize these different levels of expertise and diversify partnership to make them more dynamic. So please stay tuned. And the last one is about regulation and funding. And we encourage regulators and funders of DTX to explore whether the framework can help guide their efforts. The principles embodied in the framework could be used to establish, generalized regulatory expectations for DTX. So clarifying these expectations could help get multiple DTX developers and purchases on the same page with the respect to achieving and maintaining appropriate standards of quality throughout the life cycle of DTX use. And similarly, funders of DTX research and development, such as the NIH or Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, which is AHRQ, or Patient Centered Outcome Research Institute like PCORI, and Health Resources and Services Administration like HRSA, could encourage applicants to use the framework. And if they do, then they may demonstrate how they propose to achieve the benchmarks that it includes. So again, the take-home message from this presentation is real-world evidence can be supported with the real-world partners, and we need to set up a series of logical steps regarding why, when, and how the DTX developers should combine rigorous study designs in initial and ongoing evaluation, and recommend the practices and principles that support ethical and equitable health outcomes as the expectations of what DTX developers should do to satisfy their requirements for approval. Okay, so I think this is pretty much it. Thank you.